Given that transparent or refractive materials such as glass and water are likely to figure in one form or another in many of the projects that we undertake as a rendering artist, it would seem like a good idea to take a look at how we might best go about creating one, in this instance a basic or generic glass shader that we will apply to the glazing geometry on our building. With the material editor open then, let's right click on the Scene Materials label and create a new V-Ray material. Now, given that we won't be adding any bump or displacement to this material, the lack of map controls won't cause us any problem in this instance, although if we wanted to add a little bit of undulation to the glass surface for an extra touch of realism, we could just as easily add a V-Ray BRDF layer to the top of a standard materials layer stack and then follow the same steps that we will perform here. We do want to give a name to our material, so let's double click the new default material entry in the list, or we could of course right click and use the rename material command and call this V-Ray_glass. Now glass of course is a material that doesn't really have diffuse or surface colour properties. Even when we create a coloured glass, it isn't the diffuse controls here that provide the colour information. These options are designed to mimic surface light interaction, whereas the coloration found in glass objects typically comes from light interaction that happens on the inside of the object's volume. As glass is a reflective material though, we will need to come to the reflection section of the material controls and set the reflect colour to an almost white, so a value of around about 250 should give us a material that is almost completely reflective. Of course, glass is also a refractive material, so let's come to the refraction section and set the control colour again to an almost white value of 250. Now, although a somewhat subjective statement, using numbers that stay away from extreme numeric values, so 0 and 255, can tend to give us reflection and refraction effects that look just that little bit more realistic. Now, at this point in the creation process, we would, when using previous versions of V-Ray for SketchUp, need to manually add a text Fresnel map to the material in order to have the refraction versus reflection equation work somewhat correctly. When using either the V-Ray material or V-Ray BRDF layer though, things just work because by default this Fresnel reflections option is enabled. Of course, we will need to assign our material to the glazing geometry before we can go ahead and take a test render, so let's double click first of all on the skylight group in order to open that up, and then after using the Ctrl and A keys to select all of the geometry, right click on the newly created V-Ray glass material and use the Apply Material to Selection command. We can then do exactly the same for the door glazing, so double click to open up the group, use Ctrl and A to make certain that we have everything selected, and then apply the material via a right click in the material editor, which, given the way our glazing geometry has been created, may on some machines take a while to apply. Finally, we can left click somewhere up in the sky to deselect everything, and then go ahead and take a test render. And what we get looks pretty cool, with light from the sun now clearly streaming through the glazing that we have created into our building interior. Now the really cool thing here is that this simple glass material could actually be used now as the basis for a whole host of refractive see-through material types. So for instance, by lowering the index of refraction to about 1.33, we would essentially have a nice generic clear water shader. We can even use this shader to create more complex looking glass materials, something that we will look more closely at in our next exercise. But for now, let's take a look at just how quick and easy it would be to turn this clear glazing material into something closer to a frosted glass look. We do this by coming to the refraction controls for the V-Ray material and turning the glossiness value down to something like 0.85. If we take another render now, we can see that we have indeed created a somewhat frosted looking glass material, although you will note here that the reflections we see have remained perfectly clear and sharp. This is because the frosting effect is actually being generated on the inside of the glazing geometry where the light is being refracted, not on the outside where it is being reflected. If we did want the frosting to affect the reflections as well, then we would need to also lower the reflection glossiness parameter. As frosted glass isn't really what I want here though, I'm just going to reset the refraction glossiness back to its default value of 1. So the V-Ray material clearly makes the creation of materials such as glass and water a very easy thing to do. Now we did say that we would, in our next exercise, take a look at creating a somewhat more complex looking glass shader. Let's move on then and see how we would go about creating a coloured glass material.